Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's edition of HR Mentorship Learning Series. Tonight, we'll be looking at the topic, employee bond or bondage. I know some people have been wondering, bond or bondage, what does it mean? It's not the title of a movie. It's talking about employee bond or bondage. My name is Oluyemi Adeosun, and our facilitator for tonight is one of our core admin members, one of our regular speaker, facilitator on this prestigious platform, a very good and personal friend of mine. His name is Olukunle Unge, and he's a seasoned HR professional, 7 years experience and counting. He has experience that comes across diverse sections, including HR operations, talent acquisition, performance management, payroll administration, policy development, and so on and so forth. At the moment, and for a while now, he has been the lead HR operations at Few Miles Group, where he drives strategic HR initiatives, ensuring seamless policy implementation, and trying to ensure more than 200 employees have quality employee experience. So far, ladies and gentlemen, he has executed C-suite recruitment, championed performance management frameworks, and coordinated impactful training intervention. He is also known for his ability to build and maintain productive relationships with all stakeholders, combining operational excellence with the people first. He is currently pursuing his associate certification with the CIPM, almost rounding up. I've told him I must come for his convocation or induction before I change my mind. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, speaking to us this evening on the topic employee bond or employee bondage. Let's welcome Olukunle Unge. Over to you, my brother.
Mr. Ade, Dr. Yemi Adeosun for that. And good evening, everyone. Well, welcome to this evening's webinar, our learning series on bond and bondage, employee bond and bondage. So we'll be exploring the nature, fairness, and legality of workplace bonds. I'm very sure that for some of us, when we saw the topic, we felt, well, what does bond and bondage have to do, or what exactly are we talking about where bond and bondage is concerned? So we are just talking majorly around training bonds, especially training bonds that at different times in our organizations we've had to deploy, because I've noticed over a period of time that people have been asking certain questions where training bond is concerned. So I just felt, okay, why not we do a little, let's just dive a little into what a training bond should look like and what will make it legal, and also being able to be upheld in the court of law in the case of a dispute, a legal dispute between employee and employer, and what will even make it seem fair to everyone. So yes, welcome this evening to this. I'll try my very best to share as much knowledge as I can. All right, so we're just going to it. Let's go. So first things, a bond is a contract. A bond is a contract. And one thing about a workplace and even everyday life is contracts. There are social contracts, there are legal contracts, there are emotional contracts. Emotional contracts can be in the form of relationships that different individuals go into, whether a romantic one or a mentor one. So there are different, a bond is a contract basically. It's just one form or one type of contracts that exist out there. And like I said, they are very integral parts of a workplace. They are very integral parts of a workplace. Nobody will want to work in an organization that has not been given a contract of employment or an offer, whatever it is. No one will want to work in such an organization. It's a very risky thing if a person starts working somewhere and you don't have a contract of employment. What happens is anything is applicable. Even if there have been a verbal agreement, to say, oh, we'll be paying you 250,000. If there is no black and white written out contracts stating that, if at the end of the month the employer says, oh, it's 200, I agreed with you, it's your word against the employer. So yes, a contract is a very integral part of the workplace. And from the day a person decides to work in an organization, to earn living wages, or even start a business venture, contracts, agreements, SLAs, bonds, guide each and everyday interaction of the individuals. And that is why when a person is performing below the contracts, we are now being put on performance improvement plans, they are being given queries. It's because there is a signed contract that states the terms and conditions of that relationship. And they're usually in writing, but also in informal setting, especially when you have like an agreement with your artisan that comes to fix one or two things within your house, let's say a plumber that comes to fix a pipe. That agreement can be termed a contract. However, it's informal and it is verbal, but there is a bind on both parties to execute their own part of the contract. We'll still dive more into what that is. And it's binding on both parties. Once an agreement has been made, it's binding on both parties. When both parties agree, it is binding. And then is enforceable by either one of the party, especially in the case of a default on the other, whoever offers or who is meant to provide services. And the bond is just one of the many contracts out there within the organization that we all use. So just to explain what a contract is. A contract is a legally binding agreement between two or more parties that creates mutual obligations enforceable by law. So there are certain key things that has to be present before we can say a contract is already being had. And that is what there has to be two parties. It is highly unlikely that one will go into a personal contract with themselves. However, you can do that. You can do that. You can just be like maybe setting goals for yourself and you sign somewhere and say, okay, at the end of the year, I want to be able to do this. And if I don't do this, I do this. And then sometimes we even do that to ourselves. We say, oh, I'm targeting by my next birthday, I should be able to have done this and this. And me doing this means I'll reward myself with this. That is a form of contract. However, we are focusing more on workplace contracts, which largely are always written down. They are mutually binding. There's an obligation that is enforceable by law. That means the person who is offering the contract and the person who receives and accepts the contract, there are obligations for each party to carry out and execute. And then a contract outlines the terms and conditions of the contract and parties and protects the parties in case of a breach. So it outlines the terms and condition. Or the contracts will state you are meant to be at work. This is your job. This is your description. These are the things, your expectations. And then on the other hand, also you, the person that is accepting that contract, okay, for me to execute all of this, at the end of the month, this is the remuneration due to me. And in cases where I breach this contract, this is the penalty, this is what I consequence, these are what I face in the case I breach a contract. It can be written or verbal, but in the setting of the companies, in a formal setting, they are always written. They are always written because of record and need to refer back to it. They are always written. Now then, so for a contract to be legally enforceable and valid, certain conditions are non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. That means you cannot do without those conditions. They just have to be there. Once one is missing, it's a little bit tricky to now enforce the contract or even make it binding on either party. First things first is that there has to be an offerer and an offered. So that means one person has to make an offer and the other person has to accept the terms within the offer. So before you who is receiving the contract, before you sign, you need to look through the terms and conditions that are inside, look through the fine prints. Don't be in a hurry to sign. I've had to sign a document before, and then it just that 5 minutes that it took me to just review, that's when I found out some certain things that I needed clarity on and even needed to rework. Because once you sign, it has become binding. It is assumed that you read through, you understood the contract, and you went ahead to sign it, which means you went ahead to accept that contract. You accept the terms and conditions. You cannot come back a month after, 2 years after, and say, no, I saw it, but I didn't say anything. No, you have appended your signature to it, which means you accept it. And then there's mutual assent by way of signing, thumb printing, stamp. There's mutual assent. And that also says to the court that what you understand and you agree Then there is consideration. That means there has to be something of value each party is providing. And most times it's services, money, a promise of something. But there has to be something that each party is providing. One person might be providing a job, and the other person is providing services. And then by way of providing the job, that means what? I'm giving you money remuneration at the end of a fixed period that is stated within the contract. But there has to be a consideration. There has to be something of value exchanging between both parties. And then the capacity, that means both parties, one person cannot be underage. He has to be legally able to enter into a contract. In Nigeria, once you are below the age of 18, you cannot be said to sign a contract. If a contract will be signed with you, then there has to be the presence of a legal guardian or the parents. Without that, that contract is null and void. It cannot be acknowledged, it cannot be acceptable in the court of law. But above the age of 18, any contract signed by you is enforceable, and then you have in legal capacity to also sign. And then there have been cases where a person signs a contract, but at the time of signing, he or she is under the influence of external substances, maybe by way of alcohol, even drugs, medications that have impaired the decision-making process of the person signing. Maybe, for instance, cough syrup. We know that cough syrup, some of these cough syrup are very heavy on the body system, and that's why by law you're not meant to take cough syrup and drive. It's the same. It's being seen as the same thing as being under the influence of alcohol and driving. So those kind of situations where the person is mentally impaired and signs a contract, it can be argued that the person was not in the full consciousness to understand the terms of the contract and went ahead to sign, and then it can be thrown out of court. And then also, if you are forced to sign the contract, let's say by way of being held at gunpoint or pressure to family and friends or threats. Now, if those situations are there, it can be argued that you are not in the right capacity to sign the contract. Now, there's the legality of the contract. Every contract that has to be signed within any country or any space has to conform to the laws of that land. So you can't sign a contract that says, for instance, a contract to go kill someone. No, that's an illegal contract because it is illegal to kill a person, or a contract to sell controlled substances. No, that's an illegal contract and it cannot be upheld. In fact, you can face jail term for being able to sign that. And then enforceability, which means within the contract, there has to be clauses that states what either party can do in the case of a breach. Ultimately, either party can take the case to the court of law, to a relevant court of law that has jurisdiction to decide on the content of that contract. For instance, an employment letter, an employment contract cannot be taken to just any court in Nigeria. It has to go to the NICN, that's the industrial court, which has the jurisdiction to adjudicate on labor-related matters. So yes, the enforceability, and it states within the contract where what can be done to address any breach or failing on either party of the contract. Yeah, like the topic says, bond or bondage. So our focus mainly is on workplace bonds and how it applies to our everyday role as HR practitioners that have to deal with this kind of thing. So a bond in the workplace is a contractual agreement between employee and employer that binds an employee and employer to specific terms, usually to training, investment, service duration, or all of the above. So most times when we make use of bonds in the workplace, it's usually for trainings. That's why the most popular form of bond within the corporate world is a training bond. And what does a training bond speak to? It speaks to, the company has sent the staff on a training for a period of time. Money has been spent, investment has been made into this staff with the hope that by the time the staff comes back, they would be able to operate in certain capacity that they could not before going on that training. So many times companies tie that training to a bond with the employee just to ensure that there's a return on investment in for that training. And there's even investment bonds where, let's say, relocation or even just acquisition of properties, those kind of things can also be placed on a bond. And bond most times are outside of the contract of employment that a staff signs at the point of entry into organization. There are different types and forms of bonds, training bonds, which I've spoken about. A post-training service bond, which means after the training, they're setting expectations on both sides. They're setting expectations. There are scholarship bonds. There are companies that sponsor staff to go for their MBAs, their masters, to go study, and for the period of their study, all of the expenses being covered by the company, and definitely there'll be a bond to say, oh, when you're done with your study, however long it is, maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you will come back, and these are the expectations mutually agreed on before the person leaves. And then there are service bonds, which sometimes companies give to, especially higher ups, to just keep them at the organization, especially in situations where they've had to go poach. I know I've seen 1 or 2 situations like that where a company had to go poach a very high up executive. And what they did after the contract of employment was also to agree on, oh, you're going to be within this space. You're going to be within this space for this period of time at the very least. If not, these are some of the perks that we've offered to you that you might have to forfeit. And then financial bonds, which cover relocation costs. Let's say the person was employed, but the place of primary assignments, which is where they was meant to work, is in Abuja, but stays in Lagos. And we now need for you to move to that location. There are many times some companies will tie some form of restrictions to that movement by saying, oh, even 1 year of you going to Abuja, relocating to Abuja, because we cover the cost for you moving, even 1 year of you going to Abuja, you resign, you will be returning 50% of the amount spent for your relocation, accommodation, and all the rest. And even 2 years, you return 25%, all of that. Those are some perks of financial bonds. And one that we always have in every contract of employment, even though we've mostly put it as a clause in the contract, but many organizations have sat down and they made it a complete document of its own because of how robust they need it to be, is the confidentiality and non-compete bonds. And usually it protects the intellectual property that the employee during the employment within the organization comes up with. That means innovation strategies that they come up with while working at the organization. So, and that kind of bond, what it does is they cannot replicate immediately. They can't replicate those ideas verbatim or in detail in an organization within the same space. Let's say, for instance, they had introduced a game-changing idea that brought in about 20% increase in revenue for the organization. If such a confidentiality, if such an intellectual property and protection bond exists within the company, that employee that's brought up that idea can't now join a new organization in the same space and replicate that idea. Do definitely sue. And they have non-compete bonds, which says, oh, for 1 year after employment, you cannot join a company within the same space. 2 years after employment, you cannot join a company within the same space. There are certain peculiarities that makes the application of each of these bonds that makes it, especially once there is dispute, that the court looks at when trying to enforce it. We will still get into that very much later into the conversation. Now, I say not James Bond. And when I say not James Bond, I'm not talking just about the movie, even though, yes, I make reference to the movie in the sense of how the character is in the movie. I'm very sure for most of us that watch the franchise, the James Bond franchise, we understand that he's the kind of person that enforces what he wants to do. And then if 007, which is the official tag for him, is being sent on a mission, his own is he has to just get that mission done. However, such high-handedness cannot apply in the drafting execution of a training bond in the corporate space. First things, the training bond that is being drafted by you as the HR professional with assistance from a legal representative, maybe a member of your legal team in-house if you have one, or a consultant legal advisor, is it has to be explicit, written, and in understandable terms. You can't be given a training bond, whatever type of bond, or even contract to someone who is in Nigeria and is written in French. No, because what? It's not understandable to the person. However, if such a person requests for French, then such a request should be honored, and it should also be in writing. However, it should be in English. And when you're putting it in English, it should not be constructed in the kind of string of words and grammatical fluency of Patrick Ogbenao. If you don't know who that is, you will get it later. So yes, you can't construct such words. It has to be very split, very simple, that even someone that is not very educated, probably just literate, would understand what you're trying to say. You cannot put in words that have double meanings and would cause for doubts later. And then it should be within a reasonable duration. I've seen cases where people have been tied to bonds for the next 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. Oh, you can't leave the company, because we sent you for this training. No, it doesn't work that way. Because one of the things that the courts will do is to look at the person's position, the training they went for, and your expectations before judging. So you can't just tie the person to a 10-year bond and you have to work within the organization for the next 10 years. But as we go forward in the session, we would understand better why you can do that. But it has to be within a reasonable duration that is acceptable by the two parties. Now, there has to be proportional penalty. Exit cost should reflect the employer's actual benefit in investments. Now, proportional penalty speaks to on both sides. If, for instance, you had the cost of training, accommodation, all of it that has happened is, let's say, 10 million. And that person, we know that you're spending that kind of amount of money, which means the person is very high up, a C-suite, is very high up within the organization. You cannot impute a penalty that exceeds the total cost of the training. If you do so, the court will rule it as being unfair to the employee. So it has to be in that region of 10 million. If it's a 200,000 naira that was spent for the training, everything, it's also the penalty needs to also fall within the 200,000. If it must exceed it, you need to be able to justifiably explain and in simple terms, be able to clearly state it out why you are going above the total cost. Because I know that there are certain trainings that by the time the employee is done with the training, the expected return on the investment exceeds the 10 million. Now, another thing that will be looked at is, after coming back from this training, how long has the employee worked for within the organization? If you're tying the employee to a 5-year contract and training bond, you're tying into a 5-year training bond, and this is already 2.5 years into that training bond, and the employee wants to leave, you cannot recoup the full amount as at 5 years ago. It has to be proportional to the 2.5 years the employee has spent, also taking into account the effects and the return on investment of the previous 2.5 years spent. So that's why it has to be proportional. The penalty has to be proportional to what the employer's actual investment into the employee is. Now, it is a free consent, voluntary agreement. There is no force into signing training bonds. Just because you sent the employee on a training does not mean the employee is obligated to sign a training bond, which is why it is always good to ensure all of that is cleared before the employee goes on a training. It's always good to ensure that what you clear all of that, you discuss all of that with the employee, letting the employee know that, oh, we want to send you on this training. This is total cost to company, and these are our expectations of you. And after, once you have discussed that, you now say, oh, we need also for you to sign a training bond. These are the terms. Please read through it. If you do not agree, that's fine. We will not just send you on the training anymore. And there has to be consideration. That means tangible benefits to the employee in terms of training and skills. It's not just sending on a training that does not tie to the expectations of the employee also, because every employee has their projected career growth paths. So you can't, for instance, take someone in marketing and now send the person on a performance management training. There is no tangible benefits to the employee in that kind of setting. There is none. So it's not just going to work. Even if the employee is now forced to go for that, I'm telling you now that if it becomes a case in the courts, you might definitely lose out on that case, because they'll look at how did the marketer get into a performance management training, and it might be said that okay, the employee just couldn't go because it was kind of under duress of maybe threats to loss of employment. These are certain gray areas that lawyers tend to play around. And now there has to be mutual consent and enforceability. Like I mentioned when I was talking about the characteristics of a contract, mutual consent and enforceability. That means both parties need to be able to enforce the terms of the contract. If, for instance, before sending the employee on the training, you said, oh, by the time you come back from this training, we'll be promoting you to manager of this and this. He or she can't come back from the trainer and now becomes, oh, after while you are on training, we did a little restructuring within the organization. We feel you will not, the skills needed, you do not have it. No, there has to be, that has been agreed on. When the employee comes back, you now need to ensure that you enforce it and give what is due onto the employee. Now, these are things that makes a bond agreement not to be a bond. And then the first thing is unreasonable long-term commitments, 5 years for basic training. Like I mentioned earlier, you can't just tie an employee because you send the employee on a training. You can't just tie the employee to an unreasonable length of time in the organization because, oh, I sent you, spent so much on this training. No, it has to be proportional to the level of the training. Excessive or punitive penalties. Now, I also mentioned it that in the course of when the staff has returned from the training and you are stating that, oh, if you are spending 2 years and the staff has now spent a year and wants to leave, you can't recoup the full money of the training. It has to be proportional to the time left in the training. And you cannot now say, oh, because you are now going, you are going to be paying us back the full money as well as damages in the excess of days. No, that will be seen as excessive. It has now moved away from bond, but now into, you're nearing the corridors of bondage. Now, overly strict post-employment clauses. Some clauses being added that, because we are sent you on this training, you cannot go and work in an organization in the same space for the next 10 years. And the person is not even a C-suite. The person doesn't have any strategic input to the company, or because you're now working here and you've learned this, your work time is no longer, your closing time is no longer 4 p.m. You have to close by 6 p.m. because we expect you to do this and this within those extra 2 hours. No, you have now really gone away from what it means to have a bond with a staff. Now, unfair one-sided agreements that exploit power imbalance, agreements that tilt more towards the employer gaining and being the beneficiary of everything within the bond. So when you put in such clauses that only protects the employer and nothing on the part of the employee, that's a bondage already. Now, lack of informed consent. You just present the documents to the employer and say, sign this. You're not even telling him, you're not allowing for him to read through, him or her to read through, to understand, ask questions. You just say, sign this, you have to sign it, or if not, you leave the organization or you're not going on this training. And then violation of the labor rights, with all of the new clauses that have been added, with the clauses of the training board, you're now violating the minimum wage that you're meant to have paid, or you say, oh, for the period. Once you come back from the training, for instance, you're meant to increase your salary from 300 to 400. However, what will happen is we will not give you the 400. We'll be giving you 250 first. So after you have spent a year, we will now pay all of that sum to you as the employee. No, that's the violation, that you are violating the labor rights of that employee. And like I mentioned, also increasing the working hours of the employee. Now, what does Big Brother law says? What does the law says where this is concerned? Now, the Nigerian Labour Act is relatively silent on the terms and the structure of a bond. However, it upholds fair labor practices across every organization and every company in the country. Section 34 of the 1999 Constitution talks about the right to dignity of human persons, which protects against every form of torture, inhumane or degrading treatment, slavery or servitude, and forced or compulsory labor. Forced or compulsory labor or slavery or servitude. Just because you have not sent that employee on a training does not mean you will now tie the employee down for the next 10 years, 20 years. No, you cannot force the employee to stay in the organization. There is, I've forgotten how in law it is said, but something in the line of there is rights to leave any organization or right to be fired. I'm not really quoting it the way it is at the moment, but you can't force anybody to stay in an organization just because you sent the person on a training. It's better you don't send and allow the person to go for his training of our own violation. However, if you do have to send, I know what some organizations have not even done is this. They've come to an agreement where the employee also covers some costs. So there's a shared responsibility for the training, maybe 50-50 or 70-30, 70 on the side of the organization, which just gives that sense of responsibility also from the employee. And then also, okay, so I'm citing a case that I was able to find in the course of doing this research. So it is Afrotech Services Nigeria Limited versus MIA and Sons Limited. So I'll just give a summary of the case that happened. So what happened was Afrotech had provided supplied some equipment to MIA and Sons, and in the contract that was signed, what was stated in the contract was, okay, we're not going to pay you the total sum. I think it was about 700 to 750,000. We're not going to pay you the total sum immediately. We will stagger the payment into 4 tranches. However, within the contract, it was stated there that if we default, that is MIA and Sons now, if we default at any time on one of the instrumental payments over a period of 1 month, then Afrotech, you are within every legal right to come and take repossession of the supplied equipment. Now, I think it was at about the second or the third instrumental payments that MIA had defaulted over 1 month, and Afrotech took possession. So MIA took Afrotech to court to say, this is a breach of our contract, you cannot do this. And the first ruling from the first court that I was taken to was that Afrotech was doing every right to repossess. But MIA appealed because you have every legal right to appeal any judgment that is being passed that you're not okay with, and they took it to the Court of Appeal. However, the Court of Appeal now, it was now being said, oh no, MIA has already honored the terms of the contract. Afrotech cannot go and repossess, that they need to return and all of that. That was the ruling from the Court of Appeal. But like every judicial system within the world, Afrotech took it up to the last level, which is the Supreme Court. It was now at the Supreme Court that it was decided that no, the original terms of the contract need to be adhered to, which says what? If you default over a period of 1 month, I can come and repossess, and I'm not going to be refunding you the amount that was being paid since. But that was now the what was it called? The verdicts from the Supreme Court, which we understand what that means. That means there's no other place to take it to, really. But why did I have to bring that case in? Is this the terms of the contract already from the get-go was fair on both parties. Fair in the sense that Avotec supplied they made a sale and they allowed for MIA and Sons to pay at their own convenience. And then they're putting a clause also that protects their own interest by way of, if there is a default, I can come and take back my equipment and possibly resell to someone else and recoup what I'll have been paid. So there was fairness from the get-go in the contract, and every party mutually understood their parts and what they needed to do and adhered to it until when there was a defaulter. And then because there's now a defaulter, it is enforceable, which means what? Avotec had every right to enforce every letter in the contract by going to repossess. MIA feels aggrieved and wanted it addressed. They are still exercising their enforceability in the contract, because for them, by their own interpretation, there is now a breach in the contract because they feel, oh, we've paid some amount of money, which means we own this equipment already. However, the contract from beginning already says if you default on any of the repayments by over a month, I have every right to come and repossess. So all of the characteristics of what makes a training bond not to be a bondage, or what makes a contract to be a fair and just contract, were already in this situation. And then they were able to address and seek for redress when there was a breach. Now, that is what the courts will always look at anytime a training board is being brought to them, and which is why, as HR professionals, the thing that we need to do from the get-go is to ensure that both parties are protected. Not just the organization now, both parties are protected, because as HR, we are middlemen. As HR, we are middlemen. We are neither dancing here nor there. Now, reasonable bonds are enforceable, punitive terms are not. Now, walking the line. Now, what do I mean by walking the line? From an employer's perspective, this is what they expect to when a training board is being created and drafted. This is what they expect. They expect what? A protectment of their investments. A protectment of what? A protect of their investment. They need their investments to be protected. And that's why there's a training board in the first place. I can't, as an organization, invest even 100,000 in an employee without getting a return on it. Because if I use the 100,000 back into the business, I know how much I'm going to make over a period of time. Businesses, organizations, companies are all about what? Return on investment. So now the bond you are drafting has to protect what? The investments. So you need to sit down and draft it in such a way that what? The organization can see, okay, this person has gone for this training over this period of time. By the time they are back, these are clear routes that would ensure a return on investment. I know many organizations, what we've learned to do now is you send an employee on a training. When they come back, within the first 2 to 3 months that they come back, all that they've learned, certain people will be handpicked across the organization. They will now be holding classes for those ones. So all they've learned, they need to now pass it down to others, and then lead like a sort of team to now ensure that, okay, we now watch as he is able to pass down this knowledge. You do learn very well and all of that. And then when certain situations arise that has to do in line of that training, definitely the project manager, the project lead on that, on resolving that, would be the person that had gone for the training, while also attaching orders that were taught by him or her that returned from the training. Now, the penalty, is it proportional to the real cost of the investment? So you're even telling me that, okay, you want this employee to stay back for must work in the organization for the next 2 years, the penalty for defaulting, is it proportional to the cost of the investment? Is it the same at the point of the employee defaulting? Are you telling me that I'm going to make back the equivalent, let's say half of it, if this person spends half the number of years they're meant to stay, or even 3/4, am I going to be getting that amount of money back? Now, training bonds reduce turnover because we see a situation where immediately an employee is being sent for a training, they're ghosts. Like you don't see them anymore, or they immediately come back while they are training. They're already applying for a new place, telling that new place that, oh, I'm planning on undergoing this training because they know that it's a big deal within that industry. I'm currently undergoing this training, and I can once I get back, I can start with you immediately. So the training body is meant to help reduce that turnover, to help ensure that that turnover doesn't just happen. Now, on the employee side of a training bond, they want freedom. They want to be free to be able to make their decisions, to be able to decide, do I even want to sign this training bond? Do I even want to do so? Now, I know you're trying to protect your investments, but in protecting your investment and ensuring a return on investment, are you treating me fairly? Am I being treated fairly? Am I being or I'm just being exploited? Now, the training I've even sent me for, does it ensure my career growth within and outside of the organization? I know we don't want to hear that part of the outside, but trust me, that is what every employee is looking at before going for a training. So within the organization, are you just sending me for training and just keeping me on a position, or this training you're sending me for, is there a clear path for me within the organization, or do I looking at and also give you your 2 years and then move on? And then we need to mutually agree on the terms. An employee can do that. I'm not going to pay you and the time when I want to leave. I can only pay you a proportional, or if I must even pay to you, we will stagger the repayment across through a period of time that is acceptable to me. Yeah, so the final destination. Bonds should balance protection and freedom. So every training bond, for it not to become a bondage on either part now, because training bonds in the way they're drafted already forces the organization to keep such an employee even when they're underperforming. So they should be able to protect there should be a balance between protection of the organization and freedom of the employee. Now, there has to be fairness to both parties. It has to be fair to both parties. Then there should be legal soundness in the eyes of the law. When in doubt, please ensure you consult a legal advisor, a certified and trained legal advisor in this kind of things. Everybody's a lawyer, but everybody has where they specialize in. They are contractual lawyers, people that just deal in contract drafting, verification, vetting. There are such people like that. And there are litigation lawyers that when you have a case in court, they are the ones you call. So you just have to be careful and know who you're speaking with first. Now, there has to be mutual benefits and respect for the rights of both parties. The training bond has to establish what? Mutual benefits and show respect for the rights of both parties. Now, a bond should never feel like a bondage to all parties involved. It should never feel like a bondage to all parties involved. Everybody involved in the bond should be able to leave whenever they feel like they should be able to end the contract by mutual conversation and agreements, whenever they feel like, and they should not feel obligated or pressured to adhering to the terms of the contract. Now, a bond should be a mutual commitment and not a shackle. It should not be something that holds back the employer. It should not be something that holds backwards the employee. Thank you, everyone, for listening so far. Let's hear from you. All right. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Kunle. Excellent presentation, brilliant session, timely session too. Ladies and gentlemen, would like to hear from you. Please do raise your hands If you like to share your thoughts or you want us to learn from your experience, either you have been bonded before, or you've been put in bondage, or you have put others in bondage, or you have bonded other people. Of course, if it's anything negative, don't mention any organization, please. We are not here to, we don't want to be bonded ourselves or to be in bondage through litigation. Uncle K, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adeosun. I hope none of us have been in bondage before. Anyway, I was just curious. Fantastic presentations. I'm calling my namesake. Fantastic presentations. I was just wondering that when we find ourselves in a situation where we need to sign a bond with an organization, what should be I know the terms and conditions may be different. The cost to the organization may also differ, and all the circumstances and conditions surrounding also differs. But then what is the reasonable duration that um, a bond shouldn't exceed? That's my question. Is it a year, 2 years? Because as you said, 5 years is quite outrageous, 10 years is quite outrageous. So what is the reasonable maximum period a bond should exceed? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that question, Uncle K. So yes, there really is no, let me say, prescribed duration for a training bond or how long a bond should be. There's really no I cannot tell you now that this is the most reasonable. What happens is based on each training, based on each bond that needs to be drafted, the reason behind the bond being drafted, that should inform, what's it called? That should inform. Now, for instance, you can't, for instance, be sending a low-level employee for a training, and then your board is stating the person has to stay in the organization for the next 3 years. That's unreasonable, because I'm not sure the organization is going to be spending maybe more than 2 million on that kind of training. I'm not sure. Depends on what the training is all about. And then the projected, what's it called, career path for such an employee within the organization. And also, if the mid-level employee, maybe a mid-level manager now, it can't also be that you're not telling the person stay for the next 5 years. No, which is why one of the things that many organizations have now done is this. They come to a mutual agreement with the employee and sit down with the employee and say, see, I want to send you on this training. And the reason for this training is in the next 1 year, we will be starting this division within the organization, and we want you to be able to transition there and head that division. You know, already what you have created in the mind of that person is what? A reward system that will make he or she want to stay even beyond whatever amount of years that you're looking at. Because if there is a mutual benefit, it still goes back to that. If there's a mutual benefit for both the employee and the employer, maybe by way of promotion, increase in salary, more responsibilities, they would stay. Employees would stay because there is that mutual benefit. And also, when I was having a conversation with someone while I was drafting this, and the one of the things that she asked me was, if you're working in a big four and you are being sent for a training, would you stay after that training? Even they tell you, oh, 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, would you stay? Would you stay, especially when you know that there is a career growth path for you? So Tochukwu, to what you have said, your question, Uncle K, says, for my research, while there is no law around training bond, it's recommended that a training bond should not be above 3 years, as I found from several cases concluded. I carried out this research when I was consulted to draft a training board for an organization. So there you have it. It's just the duration is just like something that has to do with notice period. You can't give a 3-month notice period to a low-level employee. It has to be somebody in C-suite. And even within that C-suite, we are going to have to look at how the 3 months that you're saying, does this person in C-suite also hold a very strategic position that without the person, would lead to a fallout or lead to a loss for the organization. So those are some of the things that we need to look at and then have that conversation with the employee also. I hope I'll be able to answer. Lambano, I can see that your hand is up, so you can use the mic. Hello, Lambano, if you can hear me, please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Kunle. Please confirm if you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much for this insightful presentation. All right, so my question is just on what exactly makes up training costs? That's one. What exactly makes up a training cost? Because for an industry where I play, the average amount you spend on training for one technician is close to about 10 million naira just for one technician. Now, that's one. Then number two, if you have an employee on probation and you send such employee on a training, and eventually after probation, he was unable to meet up with the performance expectation, are we still expected to still ask the employee to, honor the training bond, knowing fully well that the employee was unable to perform up to expectation, and we are the one, or you are the one, relieving such employee. So those are the two questions I have. Thank you.
All right then. Thank you for that, Lambano. So I'll address the first question. So what makes up the training cost? So definitely you have what is it called? The actual cost of the training. That's wherever you're sending the employee to be trained at, how much does it cost for the training itself? Is the training 1 million? Is training 200,000? You have that amount. Then you have other logistics. Is there travel involved? Is there transportation allowance involved? Is there feeding allowance involved? Is there accommodation allowance involved? So all of those other costs also add up towards the training costs per the employee. I know in some organizations, they've even gone as far as to say, as also to check that, okay, how long will this employee be out for on this training? Or is out for 3 days. In those 3 days, by way of the employee's salary, and what does it come to? And then they add it to the training cost. But most times, most people don't even look into that part. What they just look at is how much is the training itself and other logistics cost. So all of that will add up to what the training cost, even though there are also other cost to company, because somebody actually sat down to plan the training. Someone sat down to make calls and emails to the training facilitator. All of those things also are part of the training costs for each training. And then so for the second question, when somebody joins the organization newly, is still under probation and has to go on a training. And however, after the training period and probation period, you now notice that this person is not performing. First things first, I'm not sure the level of performance, but I'm very sure that there should be a performance management system in place first that speaks to, okay, if after probationary period, this employee has not performed up to expectations and looks at the entire input of the employee and checks what are the areas of improvements, and then places on a PIP and probably extends probationary period by 3 months. And in that 3 months, there's a structured plan that says, okay, by the end of 1 week, you should be able to do this, and we'll sit down and talk about this. By the end of 1 month, these are the talking points. By the end of 2 months, these are the talking points. By the end of 3 months, these are the talking points. So that at that point, on both parties, on both sides, both can know that what we've tried our best. And then it's not coming to what we think. You can end the contract of employment. However, for your training bond, since you're the one that is not trying to terminate the contract because of performance that you did not foresee, and now there is an obligation to repay. It's going to be the same thing, which is this. In every contract, if one party is expected to act in one way when termination is concerned, or what's it called, or resignation is concerned, by fairness and justness of the law, the expectation is also being laid on the other party. What do I mean? If the bond states that if the employee leaves at this point, he or she is meant to repay certain amount of money to the organization. If the organization is now the one that is terminating, we all know what that means. You and the one that is now went to what? To forfeit. That's what it means, really. That's what the law is going to look at, because the law is going to tell you, the court will tell you straight. The employee did not say he does not want to work. You are the one that are saying you don't want him or her to work. And I'm very sure if you sit down with the employer and say, oh, we are terminating employment, but because we spent X amount of money on you for the training during your probation period, you have to return X amount of money. The first question I'm going to tell you is that, did I tell you I don't want to work? You're the one that said I should go now. Why am I paying you money back? If you want to recoup me money, keep me in the system and let me work the work. So that is it. You want to ask something in addition, Ambono?
Yes, not a question actually, but I just want to look for a way out of this issue of training bond. I don't know if it's actually visible, but let me just throw it open here. Is it possible to have a policy, an insurance policy that covers training bond in such a way that if an employee should leave, I don't need to start running after that employee. I just write to my insurance provider. Oh, kindly activate social policy for me because I have an employee whom I've spent millions of naira on and is leaving. Is it possible to have such? I don't know if anyone is having such a policy in our meet here.
Okay, so I'm not sure I've seen one like that. I'm not very sure I've seen one like that. But however, I'm very sure if you explore, reach out to certain insurance providers, because they might have something, it might not just be fully tailored to how you want it, but they might have something that's very close to it. So I think you should just reach out to a couple of insurance providers and find that out. So I have a question in the chat box from Bowale, which says, in a case where an employee is contractually bound to return after an overseas training but refuses to do so, what steps can the employer take? All right, so I'm very sure they are guarantors. I'm very sure they're guarantors, which is why I said during the course of the presentation that when drafting a training bond or any bond at all, please seek legal advice, because they will now be able to they'll look into all of these nuances where somebody going abroad and then refuses to come back. See, we're in an HR profession that, let me be very frank with you, we cannot shy away from reading on cases as they come. It's a good thing that many of us in this training now, we belong to the HR mentorship platform, and people tend to ask questions, drop even some cases that they see online. Please read up, so that from the beginning, when you're setting up your training bond, such things like this, you can put in clauses that protect the organization. If in the training board already, it states there that the cost of the training will have to be repaid by the employee when they leave, and in the event that we cannot get in touch with you, we'll have to get in touch with your guarantor. You have covered your organization. And then maybe, like Lambono had asked, you might want to also look into speaking with insurance companies that might be able to take on the cover for this. I'm not sure about insurance companies, but I know that over time we've been making a lot of different kind of insurances. But however, in this kind of situation, if you don't have a clause in your training bonds that says you can recoup the money from the guarantor, reach out to the guarantor and recoup the money or anything, what can happen is the final benefits that owed to the employee will not be paid. You have recouped out of part of the money, and you keep reaching out to the employee to say, please, Oga, come and pay us our money. We sent you on the training. You keep reaching out and hope that his good nature, which he doesn't have anymore, becomes would take over. Now, Tochukwu Ume is also asking, a CEO once insisted that on-the-job training should form part of the training bond for his organization. This approach, right? How can one read this approach, right? Insisted that on-the-job training should form part of the training bond for his organization. So on-the-job training forming a part of the training bond for the organization is a training. I'm not sure what you mean. I think maybe if you can clarify what you mean by on-the-job training, so that I can better answer that question, please, Tochukwu. If you can clarify what you mean by on-the-job training. Your second question says, how can one really be able to calculate the actual cost of on-the-job training? Please clarify what you mean by on-the-job training, please. Please clarify what you mean by that. Please, in a demo, okay, says in practical terms, please, can you help do a quick calculation analysis on how a 10 million naira training expenses, a 10 million naira training expenses can be recouped? Okay. Yeah, so Jumai Olawale has dropped a response to that, and she says the bond amount of 10 million is to be amortized, that means spread over the total duration of the bond. If the employee has already spent a portion of the agreed bond period in the system, the remaining value is calculated by dividing the total bond amount by the full number of months, then we multiplying by the number of months left. So this is the calculation. 10 million divided by total bond months. If, for instance, it's 36 months, which is 3 years, so that is 10 million divided by 36 times the remaining number of months. If the person has spent 12 months already, times 24, which now gives you the amount payable. That means the balance amount that the person needs to pay. This ensures the repayment is fair and proportional to the unfulfilled duration of the bond agreement. Yes. Please, how long is Lillian is asking, please, how long is an appropriate non-compete for interns under 6 months internship? Okay, so I think I'm wondering to myself why your interns have non-compete. I want to assume that they are exposed to certain I want to assume that they are exposed to certain kind of information within organizations, but for an intern to have a non-compete, except the intern is interning to MD CEO, so he or she is exposed to company intellectual properties. But if it's just like an HR intern, a marketing intern, a non-compete, wow. Okay.
I see Tochukwu's hands up.
Okay, yes, Tochukwu, before we come back to this non-compete for interns, Tochukwu, please, I think you want to explain the on-the-job training. Tochukwu, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Kunle and Mentor. We appreciate your work. So what I meant by on-the-job training, for example, where you hire people who are not necessarily very experienced, and by the course of the job, I mean, you show them some things. Oh, this is how we use this app. This is how to send an email. This is what you should do. Not just for them to be able to deliver their job well. So this person says, oh, this person, when he came, he didn't know so much. I trained him. Now he's being efficient and effective. So I think I should have a training bond over this person because he came with very little experience or knowledge. And by the course of the job, I trained him to, indirect, not really spending money outside, but just by showing in the office, oh, do this, this is how to do, this is how to do. So he says this is also should be a part of non-compete, should be a part of a training bond. So that's what I'm asking, is this approach right? And how can one really be able to compute exactly how much this on-the-job training is worth, even if it is correct? I don't think it is correct, but I'm just asking so you could explain or guide better. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that clarification. So I get what you're saying, and if that is the situation, then that means every single person in organization will have to now be tied to a training bond, because we all are learning new applications that come out every time, learning how to do something better.
Oh, we lost you now.
And all of that.
If you are not going to speak tomorrow.
However, if it's that you had to take out like a training time, this is what I mean. If you like, when we have onboarding sessions, for instance, now there's a cost to that onboarding. There's a cost, and the cost is this. This is what the cost is: refreshments, the refreshments, and then mostly refreshments, and then sometimes if you have to rent a space outside of the office for offices that don't have a meeting room, for instance. So that is the cost of the onboarding. So in this conversation of on the job training, if you have to rent a space and then take out time, let's say 2 hours and 3 hours, and in that 2 hours to 3 hours, you have now spent an additional amount of money, then you can start looking at trying to put a training bond. However, in the spirit of being fair and just, I don't see why that should be a part of a training bond, because the on-the-job training now that this person the on-the-job training now that this person is going through is to the benefits of the company at the start. And we all, I say it again, that we all would then have to have what? We all would then have to have what? Being given training bonds at the start of our careers. There are certain skills that even I now, if I change industry and go to a new place, if I've not used application at all in the past, they will need to train me. I will need to go through a period of training. I will need to be put through. It is so that I can deliver on the job that you brought me in for. That is why you're giving me this on-the-job training. That's why I'm honing my skills. So you can't, in application really, training bonds apply to those additional trainings outside of the organization that improves our skills, our mental capacity, ability to manage situations better, or even learn more in that field. For instance, if I'm being sent on a strategic talent acquisition training, it's just so that I can better learn how to do what? To recruit strategic positions. Now, that's I can be bonded to, but not because my manager taught me how to go on LinkedIn to search for someone. Like, I understand where your CEO is coming from. However, in the application of it is going to be a very tricky one to put into value terms, which is where it will now become tricky. And what you have now exposed your company to is this: you will only hire trained hands. And hiring trained hands will mean that the person need to, from the beginning, know your organization. And that is not possible. No matter the same, what's it called, industry that we are in, every organization is each other. So in application, no, Tochukwu, that is not possible. However, I think you just need to sit down with your CEO and explain very well so that he understands how training bonds really work. Maybe that's where there is a disconnect. Now, Lillian, back to your question of how long is an appropriate non-compete for interns. Let me be very direct with you. It's not advisable for you to non-compete interns. It is not advisable. Please, it is not advisable to non-compete interns. Interns are there to learn, they're there to grow, they're there to add value to your organization. Yes, when we are recruiting for interns, one of the things that we look out for is this person confidential? Can this person keep information in confidence? Which is what we look out for. But in non-compete, it's going to be very tricky. I use that advice. I do not advise it. Yes. So So Uncle K says sometimes you may have to bring expatriates in from abroad to train staff on the job. Can a bond be contracted? Yes, it is a form of training. It is a form of training. So yes, a bond can be contracted, especially because what? I know that in industries where they use heavy machineries and they need expatriates to train people on how to use it, and then let's say for instance in FMCG operating certain kind of equipment, machinery that they use, you can bond the employee to say, oh, for the next 3 to 4 years, no, not 3 to 4 years, sorry, but next 1 to 2 years, you have to be working with the organization. But really, 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 I think, let me put this out there now. One of the best ways to quickly get a return on investment for every training you send staff to is to do what? Is to ensure that they pass on that knowledge. They pass on that knowledge to someone else within the system. So you have more people. It's like you're getting more value for training sets. So one person goes and then four more people knows how to learn from that person. And that's 5 people that now know how to do this. Doctor said, Kunle, we should bond everyone on HR mentorship who listen to our webinars. Please, people specify how many years the bond should be. He's looking like that. Okay, Emmanuel asked, what's best approach should be adopted by employee in dealing with training bond? My certificate was seized by my employer even after spending the required number of years as contained in the bond. Please, if you're no longer with that employer, seek legal redress. If you're however with the employer, please keep appealing till they release that to you. And one other thing, I don't know how you got I don't know how that training was. Maybe you can reach out to the trainer, get the certificates. But however, please appeal to the organization to please release your certificate. It is your own skill. Yes, like doctor asked, hope you photocopied. Yes, please. Since you photocopied and even did the scan, so you have that. You can always present that, and but please just appeal to the management to release it, and you can also contact the training center, just like doctor said, to give you another copy or attestation of participation. That would also help. Dr. Anyoke is asking, employer has the ability to ease or our staff or employee. Yes. Likewise, employee has his or her responsibility to employer. Yes, it is always a mutual two-way traffic in everything that we do in organization. It is not just one person. It is always what? A two-way traffic, which means employer obligation to the staff, employee obligation to the organization. And I think with that, I've come to the end of the questions and comments that I have in the chat box. If anyone asks a question, you can please also signify. Inedima, I hope you were able to see the breakdown that was dropped by Jumai in response to your question. Please, so that you can copy that out and use that going forward. And every other person, please, if you can check the chat, you will see that also. You can copy out that. Okay, Tochukwu.
Okay, thank you, sir. Just quickly, if an employee who was trained comes back and pass down the training, like training of other staff members, will it still make sense for such a person to be tied under bond? Thank you.
Who now? The person, sorry, before you go, the person who did the training now, will be tied under bond?
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, if I go for a training and come back, and then I transmit this training or this information I have acquired, or this knowledge or skills to other staff members. Does it still make sense to say that they should put me under a training bond? After all,
yes, sir. Yes, sir, it does. It is part of your return on investment.
I've transmitted that.
You transmitted the knowledge, but like this game, Chinese Whispers, like the game Chinese Whispers, where you have 5 people, for instance, the first person is being told a phrase, and by the 5th person, you're having something totally different. That is how it is for even passed down knowledge. That is how it is, because everybody assimilates on different levels, and you are the first recipient of the information of the training. So yes, there is still a need for you to be bonded. You still need to give that return on investment. Passing down the knowledge is just part of the return on investment. It is not the whole. You don't use that as an excuse to run away from the organization. Like I said, we are protecting the organization and also protecting what? The employee. Both parties need to mutually benefit from the training and the bond that is being contracted. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, Doctor, for the privilege. We shall be back very soon with another training.
So let me just add one thing, just one tiny thing. And I'm adding it because of the questions my brother and friend Tochukwu has raised. So I just want to add it, even though I know that Kunle must have alluded to it or implied it. So note that as an employee, you can negotiate a bond. Let me say that again. It is not just because your company just says, oh, this bond, 3 years, that you just take it and sign. For example, if they say 3 years, this is hypothetical, you can negotiate and say, hey, let's make it 2 years. You can now throw it in to say, I commit that in the next 1 year, I will train 3 people and we'll be able to do like a competency assessment that will be proven to the management or to the HOD or relevant stakeholders. And because of that, they may now say, okay, instead of 3 years, we can reduce the bond to 2 years and now include that clause on transfer knowledge. So you are trying to drop the years, but you are providing something on the table. I brought this up based on the question Tochukwu asked. So almost anything in life can be negotiated. You can also, depending on the kind of bond and training, you can also say, what if I help, in addition to what I'm doing, what if I help the company make XYZ amount of money? Can it offset? So you can suggest other ways that value will be provided. Why is the company bonding in the first place? They are trying to retain value. Don't forget that. They are trying to retain value, not just retain you. They are retaining you because you are the carrier or perceived carrier of the value. So if there are other ways you can show that you can bring that value or greater value to the table, you can also easily negotiate a bond. The last thing I want to draw, I know some companies do it, never be under pressure that they will give you a bond and on that table right there and there, you will sign it. I know you can read English. I know we are all learned colleagues, even though we are not lawyers, or most of us, or some of us are not lawyers. Resist the temptation. Ask for the opportunity to say, hey, let me take this home. Let me read this, sleep over it. If possible, everybody on this course should have at least 5 lawyers in your life, or 20. Depending on the school you went, the kind of secondary school, primary school, or church member or mosque member, there should be lawyers. And that's why, please, just like you develop relationship with doctors, they may be able to read it. And if you have to pay a token for them to read it for you, they may just draw your attention to one clause or one comma, and it may be significant. Or let them give you go ahead to say all is correct. On this note, I would like to say thank you to Kunle, and I mean it. This is insightful. Ladies and gentlemen, let us unmute and appreciate our very own Kunle. Let's thank him.
Thank you so much, Kunle, for
Thank
this
you very
fantastic
much.
Thank you,
God bless
Kunle.
you.
Honestly, you have played,
Thank you,
you
Kunle.
Thank you,
killed this
Kunle.
topic. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Yes, Mr. Hughes, thank you, bless you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Doctor, for the privilege. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.